Hello everybody, it is Elagatua and I am back with another replay. Today we're going to be talking about a game that I played against the Ghost of Lawww, and this was a global league game, so not a tournament game, for a little bit of a change of pace. And this was actually one of the more interesting games that I've played in a long time for a lot of different reasons, not even necessarily just about the game itself. And this game ended up being, like, in terms of people following the game, this is probably the single most followed game that I've ever played. So a lot of people were really interested in it, and I think it has a lot to do with the players involved. So if you don't know who Lawww is actually a standard player who was the #1 standard player for quite a while during periods of last year, and made a fog alt account basically to see how far he could climb up the fog ladder. And unsurprisingly, for a high caliber standard player, Lawww was able to do very well on the fog ladder. And at the time of this game, I believe was 40 wins and 1 loss, with I think a loss to Poland, who is another well-known standard player who does some Fog as well. So kind of amusing that only a standard player could beat the standard player at Fog. And so when this match got created, I think a lot of people were excited to see how Lawww would do against someone who is a Fog main and someone who's very experienced at Fog, like me. So a lot of people were really interested in that. I think another reason people were really interested in this game is that if you're someone who frequents the Advanced Wars Discord, Lawww is, I think, a well-known Elagatua simp. That is, there's no other way to say it. It's kind of funny, but he's kind of said a lot of things about how great I am, and I kind of take it all with a grain of salt, because it's, I think, a mix between kind of tongue-in-cheek and real praise. So it doesn't really, I don't really care one way or the other, but I think everybody was kind of interested to see how Lawww would do against someone who, at least according to Lawww, is like unbeatable, which I wish that were more true. That because Fog is a game mode where sometimes if your opponent is good enough and the cards fall the wrong way, then you can definitely just lose. So definitely nobody is unbeatable, to put it mildly. So a third reason that this game got a lot of attention is that it is on a map called Lulu Lagoon. And this map is very, very, very unique if you know anything about maps in the Global League. So we're going to start off this video by going through this map and talking about it, because the way this map plays is very, very different to pretty much any other map that I've played. And I think a lot of people are going to be interested in hearing me break this map down. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this, because there's a lot to talk about for this map. So let's go ahead and dive in here. So the first thing that you will notice if you're taking a look at this map is we've got 3 bases. You've got a base here, the neutral base here, and then a base over here. And immediately what you will realize with these bases, or at least 2 of the bases, is that there is a big river, or sea tiles basically, that are cutting off 2 of these bases from the rest of the map. And so you do start off with a lander, and I guess likewise the other side of the map similarly disconnected from the majority of the map. So you are going to be forced to use naval units much more extensively on this map than you would on another map, because you're not going to be able to get units to the main portion of the map without ferrying them across this sea. So that is a very unique part of the map. Additionally, if we look at kind of where you can go, there's a few important landing points. So one landing point is right here. So there's some shoals here. And then you can unload onto this forest tile here, and then also you can unload infantry onto this mountain over there. And then you've got some more unloadable squares right here, these shoals and these shoals. So there's kind of two spots that you can unload on. And so you can get onto this city and these plains, this river if you want to unload infantry, and then these two squares as well. Additionally, if you want to go towards more the center of the map, you can get to kind of this tile to maybe push towards the center, or if you want to shift your lander over to the right side of your island, over here towards the port side, you can just kind of shuttle back and forth between the two ports. So that is kind of an option. But these areas here, like these two areas and these areas, are far apart enough that you are going to have to plan in advance where you're going to be sending your lander, because the landers can only move 6 squares unless you're a CO that has additional transport movement like Sammy or Drake. So if your lander can only go 6 squares, the only square that the lander can go up to here from is this top leftmost tile here. If the lander is in any of these other squares, or like in the port or whatever, it's not going to have enough movement to actually get up to this corner. So the positioning that you're going to have is going to be pretty important. And likewise, if you want to be able to get infantry from both bases directly on the lander, well, there's only one square where they can all move in one turn. This, in practice, tends not to be a big deal, but it's worth considering. And also, if you're going to be using this port to ferry units over this way, you're going to either have to build vehicles in consecutive turns from this base, or figure out a way to get vehicles to drive one turn over from here so that they can make it to the port in time, because this port is more than 6 moves away from this base because this mountain is in the way. So there's a lot of logistics involved with getting units over to the mainland that you're going to have to think about with the lander movement. Okay, so those are the two bases over here. Let's talk about this base. So this third base is your weak side base because there's only one, but it is starting out on the mainland. So whatever you build from here is not going to have to worry about any lander shenanigans. And also, this base, I mean, the way that the map curves like this means that this bottom right base ends up being very close in proximity to a lot of this stuff. If you look at just 2 tank moves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're looking at, like almost, I'm not going to draw out every single square, right? But you get the idea. You're looking at, this whole area, almost the entire side of the center, I guess the other parts of the islands. The center is just kind of the middle, I guess, the middle peninsula maybe. Regardless, it's almost covered within 2 tank moves. So this base ends up being really strong for vehicles early because you can exert a lot of pressure over a pretty substantial quantity of the map, and your opponent can only get vehicles and infantry over here by sending them across using the lander. So that is another interesting dynamic. All right, that covers our bases, at least for now. Let's go into some other features of this map. So we've got an airport here, and the airport is on the islands, I guess. And obviously the nice thing about an airport on an island map is that you can fly over the water with your air units. And additionally, this airport is relatively centralized. So the airport is going to be very useful because it is really the fastest reinforcement towards the center of the map. And you can get pretty far with 2 copter moves. You can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if we draw kind of a diagonal here, so you're covering, I don't know if my diagonal is perfect here, but you get the idea, right? I think my diagonal is not perfect, but this is a pretty substantial part of the map that you can cover with 2 copter moves, and it does cover access to both of these central cities. So the airport is going to be very relevant, and once you start getting everything online and you start getting your income up into around 20K, maybe a little more than 20K, if you can get extra properties, then you're going to be using that airport pretty heavily. Do keep in mind that even income on this map is 21K. So despite kind of the craziness of the map, this is not an especially high income map. 21K is not usually enough to get Neotanks out on the map without some kind of money saving or planning in advance, basically, that you're gonna tech into units that are more expensive. Let's talk about these. This port. So there's 2 ports here, and you do start out with a lander, but I think now is the right time to start talking about the reinforcement dynamics. So when you have a lander, it's going to start either on this side or it's going to be over on the other side, depending on whether you're loading or unloading your units. And then you're going to basically drop off units, or you're going to load in units, and then you're going to send it to the other side. And so you have a throughput of units. There's a rate of units that you can transport across, and that is 2 units per 2 turns, right? Because you're going to spend 1 turn loading units, and then you spend the next turn dropping them off. And then you come back and you spend the next turn loading units, and then you spend the next turn dropping them off. So you're basically able to ferry over 1 unit per turn on average. Obviously, it's 2 units every 2 turns. But the point is that the amount of units that you are building is 2 units every turn, which is more than your throughput. It's more than the lander can actually move over. So having 1 lander is not enough. If you don't build any sort of extra transport power, then you're going to end up with an accumulation of units on your island because your lander does not have enough space to actually carry them across at the speed that you're building them. And so because of this, you are absolutely going to want to invest in additional transport power to get more units across to the center area so that you don't have units constantly built up. Like you can see here in the early game, there's a lot of infantry that are just chilling out because there's nothing to take them across. And so this is what happens. So you have some options for what you can build from your port or from your airport. So your options are going to be either a black boat, a lander, or T-copters. Okay, so those are your units that can transport stuff across the gap. And let's talk about each one separately. So let's start with the black boat. So one advantage, black boat has a couple of advantages, I think, and it's probably the most standard thing that you would build. Black boats are relatively cheap. They cost 7.5K, and they're able to ferry 2 more units across per 2 turns. They can only ferry infantry, so that is a limitation. So they're not going to be able to ferry over vehicles, but they are kind of the cheapest way to equalize the amount of units you can ferry versus the amount of units you can build. Because if you've got a lander and you've got a black boat, you're basically able to ferry over 2 units every turn, and you're building 2 units every turn. So in theory, you're able to get everything across. This does come with the limitation that you are still limited to ferrying 2 vehicles across every 2 turns, because you can only put vehicles in the lander. You can't put it in the black boat. So that is something that you will have to consider, and that is one of the downsides. If you are willing to spend an additional 4,500 to spend 12K, you can get a second lander. But landers have a disadvantage compared to black boats in terms of movement. So the black boats can move 7 squares if you don't have any sort of movement boosting capabilities. And landers can only move 6. And that actually ends up mattering a lot, because if you have a second lander, you're a little bit more limited. I guess the second lander, the movement doesn't matter as much. But when you're at the black boat, you can, for example, have the black boat and the lander on these 2 squares, and then you have an option of which transport to send to which landing point, because they can both basically make it to here, with the black boat having that extra square of movement. So you get a little bit of flexibility with a black boat that you wouldn't get with a second lander. Additionally, the lander was more expensive, right? So that's an additional investment, and you're going to have to make this investment relatively quickly. The naval unit, you really need to buy it within probably the first 10 turns. Otherwise, you're just going to start to accumulate a ton of units here that aren't fighting. And the longer you wait to make that transport unit, it is literally essentially killing units that could be on the mainland, because they're just stuck here. They might as well not exist. If they're just sitting here, they're not helping you at all. So every turn that you don't have that extra transport capability is just infantry that you don't have fighting that aren't helping you win. So if you're going to build a lander instead of a black boat, then you need to spend more money on that transport unit instead of early vehicles. And it's in the early game, so this is a greater percentage of your total income because you haven't finished all your captures yet. So that is another downside to the lander. There's a third option. Third option is T-copters. And so T-copters are nice because they have more flexibility in terms of movement. They can just kind of fly right across. But I don't think T-copters are a great option as your second transport. And so Laska Larnar in this game that I'm just kind of skimming through, you see actually goes for the T-copter as the second transport option, but the T-copter is only able to ferry 1 unit across per turn. So if you only have the lander and the T-copter, you're still accumulating units over here that aren't helping you fight. So I think a T-copter can be a good third transport unit. If you end up with a lander and a black boat in a T-copter, I think that's potentially very good, because what ends up happening is in the early game, you're going to be building units from both of these bases while you're still trying to get money to build the black boat. And while that's happening, you're starting to build up infantry that can't make it across. And so even when you end up getting that black boat, you are still just kind of equalizing it, but you still have this backlog of infantry. So adding a T-copter on top of the black boat actually helps you reduce that inventory of infantry, and it is kind of creating additional infantry that are going to help you fight here. Even though eventually, if the game goes long enough, you kind of will run out of that backlog of infantry, because eventually you'll be shuttling kind of 5 infantry across, or 5 units across every 2 turns, and you're only producing 4. So eventually you're going to run out of extra units. But I think in the long run, it is quite valuable to have that third transport unit. But you have to weigh it against your kind of economic position and your current needs, because you may actually need more vehicles from like this base, or more vehicles from this base, or more copters, or whatever, and you need to really be conservative with your income, and you can't afford that extra transport to merely give you more infantry. But it is, if you have that luxury, it can really help you snowball. So it's definitely worth thinking about. All right, let's talk about comm towers. So this map has 4 comm towers, and 2 of them are in the sides on the mainland, and then there's 1 on each island that is kind of, it's accessible, but your infantry have to go through this weird gauntlet of slow movement terrain in order to get there. And you can actually kind of ferry units to this shoals if you want to get there quicker, but it's very unlikely that you want to do that. Generally what's going to happen is you're going to cap this airport with an infantry, and then whenever that infantry is done, you send it down here, and then he goes on the mountain, and then he goes on the river, and then he finally makes it to the comm tower. So that first comm tower, even though it's I mean, very free, and it's never something that is really going to be contestable, it is going to take you a little bit for you to actually reach it. So it's going to be, it's day 11 and day 10 when the first comm tower is getting capped for the first time, and it's not really realistic to get it any earlier than that, because it's just not worth sacrificing the income or sacrificing the time of a transport to get it any more quickly. So we do have that 1 comm tower is very not contested. These 2 comm towers are very contested in theory, and these, I think, are really kind of the focal point of the map. So if we're talking about kind of the high-level design of, I think, how this map was intended to play, you have these 2 center properties that are right in the middle, obviously very contested because of their position right in the center of the map. And then you also have the comm towers that are also very central in terms of their vertical position, but obviously they're on the sides of the map. And so the idea is get 3 out of the 4. And if you get 3 out of the 4, then you're probably going to be winning. So I think that's the theory. And if you look at the positioning of this shoal here, landing infantry into these 2 squares and these 2 squares gives you 1 move access with your infantry to the comm tower. So this is something that you can access very quickly, and this is why I spent some time talking about kind of lander movement to this corner, because this square ends up being very important, because this is your very quick access to this very contested property. And in the early game, this is something that you're likely going to want to take advantage of, getting infantry to these 2 squares quickly, because 1 infantry can get on the mountains and then go to maybe this city or this city, and the other one can grab this comm tower. And since this is a 2 comm tower map, having 2 towers is very important, because you hit that threshold where 2 infantry can clear off an infantry from a city, 2 tanks can clear off a tank from a city if you've got those 2 comm towers. And if you've got 3 comm towers, then your opponent is not going to have more than 1. So that denies them that threshold. And there are some other minor thresholds that come along with having 3 towers as well. But really getting 2 often is going to simplify your combat a lot, and is going to be very important. So a lot of the opener theory that we're not going to get to yet, we will get to that in a little bit, but a lot of the opener theory is going to revolve around these comm towers, because they are very contestable, and they're also accessible very early, and so they're going to play into the opener very heavily. Okay, so we've already touched on this a little bit, but let's talk about some contested properties. There's really not a whole lot of contested properties on this map. We talked about the 2 center cities. These center cities are pretty contestable, but these cities oftentimes end up just going to the first player that takes them. And the reason for that is that this city is very accessible by infantry getting ferried over with like a black boat to here. And so there's a pretty good reinforcement flow of infantry in this direction. And it's the reinforcement flow of infantry from the other direction is actually substantially farther away from the city. However, you do have this tile that is 3 squares away, and it's behind these C tiles. And this is the artillery tile. That's what this is for. And so if you get this city, and then you send an artillery over from this side, and you plant it on here, that artillery is really, really difficult to remove. And so you can kind of prevent caps of this city very easily once you've gotten it at the beginning. And the same thing applies in the other direction, where player 1, I believe, can block this side with artillery at the expense of having slower infantry reinforcements. So oftentimes whoever gets these cities first has a much easier time holding on to them once they've been captured. And it's not really like a piston kind of map where you've got pushing on one side and then you front shift to the other side and you flip all the contested cities. Like, it's not really that kind of map, at least not in the center. And then on the sides, so we got the comm tower, which is contested because you have very fast infantry access from the lander, as we just mentioned, but also the weak side base has just direct access to it, right? So you can send vehicles directly over there, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the 2 tank move positioning is adjacent to the tower. So that is going to help pressure that structure because you can get tanks to it in very few moves. So that kind of helps those cities become very contested. And the same thing applies for this city as well, where it's 1 infantry move away from the unload position, but it is also 2 tank moves from this base. And so what you can sometimes see is, especially this city ends up staying neutral for a while because everybody's kind of shuttling a bunch of vehicles and infantry to that position, and it ends up not being able to be controlled for very long, or at least long enough for it to get flipped. So other than those cities, I genuinely do not think there's anything that's meaningfully contested, just because all these remaining cities are so close to this base that it is very, very difficult to imagine flipping any of these without having some really substantial advantage in the game. And there's really nothing else, because all of these cities kind of belong to player 2. And you've got the center cities, which are contested, as we talked about. And you got these that are contested, and then all these cities are very far back as well. So it's really just these. That's it. That's pretty much all you're fighting over. So not too complicated in terms of the contested city breakdown. Now let's talk about the fronts. So what you tend to have here is you tend to have a lot of units getting ferried over to here, and the 2 base side is going to be fighting against the weak side, which has 1 base, but the 1 base is able to contribute units every turn. And especially in the early game, you can end up with much more vehicles on the weak side than your opponent can transport over. So that's because you can start the game by just spamming vehicles out of this weak side base and kind of overwhelm what your opponent can match you with being ferried over. So something that you can see is you can see kind of a, I guess, like kind of a wipeout situation where if you can sufficiently overwhelm things on the weak side to the point where you can start to control this unloading area, you can almost push player 2 like over to the center, because anything that's going to fight over here has to get unloaded from the lander. And so if it's getting unloaded, then it's got to sit there for a turn as it gets unloaded. And if your opponent is kind of already up here, it's going to get free shots on whatever you're unloading. So you have to be aware of that if you don't, as player 2, if you don't commit enough this way, and if you don't commit this way enough as player 1, then you can kind of just get totally knocked out of this part of the map, or this part of the map, and so that's pretty dangerous and something you need to watch out for. Additionally, you do have the airport that can kind of flex to either side and also flex to the center. But the main dynamic here is that once you get to around day 9 or day 10, and you've got that second transport unit out, then now you're starting to ferry 2 vehicles and 2 infantry every other turn to this kind of unload front. The power dynamics start to shift, whereas early the vehicles from the weak side base, you can just get more vehicles and you can get more power out of this base, and you can't really match it from the other side. Well, later on, you're getting those vehicles, you're getting that air reinforce, but importantly, you are getting the infantry reinforce. You're going to be able to start to get more infantry here than your opponent can match from this base, because this base, if you're fighting over here, this base is probably building vehicles, right? It's not reinforcing infantry. So if you're going to get additional infantry over to this side, well, where is it going to come from? I mean, it's going to have to come from these bases shuttled over this way, but the infantry get unloaded here, and then they've got to walk like 3 turns to the fight. So it's very slow. And so in the early game, you have to avoid being kind of pushed off the map. But in the mid and late game, now the weak side has to worry about maintaining an infantry count that is sufficient to match the push, the infantry push being generated in this direction because of those extra transport units. So to summarize that dynamic, early game, the weak side is strong. In the mid game, the strong side ends up becoming stronger, and the longer the game goes, the stronger the strong side is going to become, because it's just going to be very difficult to match the infantry reinforce. It's the sheer numbers of infantry is going to be difficult to keep up with on the weak side. So those are your front dynamics. Now we can talk about maybe some opener theory, and we got to spend some time on this as well, because this ends up being very complicated for a lot of reasons. So let's just get into it. So in order to talk about the opener theory, we gotta look at these lander positions, and if you're an eagle-eyed viewer or you've been paying attention, you'll notice that these lander positions are wrong. They're not where they are currently, and that is because this map has actually been changed, and the thing that changed specifically was the position of the player 2 lander. So some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about for the rest of this video may not necessarily apply to your future matches in exactly the same way, because the map that you will be playing is not the exact same map that was covered in this video. We will talk about why that is in just a moment. But so I believe this lander was moved 1 square to the right, and the reason for this has to do with a day 3 recon opener, and we'll explain what the issue is here. All right, so let's run through this replay. This is just a replay that I threw together myself, actually, just to demonstrate the issue here. So this issue is regarding the Day 3 Recon build. So we're going to have both Player 1 and Player 2 go for a Day 3 Recon in this example replay. And then we will also have Player 1 go for the most aggressive capture order possible to get these two infantry to these two properties as quickly as possible. And we will have Player 2 do the same thing. And we can see that because Player 1 gets to move their recon first, Player 2's Day 3 recon opener actually has no way to prevent the captures here, because this recon can make it all the way to this city and all the way to this comm tower, but it has to do so in the dark. And so because in this in the old version of the map, Player 1's Day 3 recon can basically make it safely, like it's always going to be safe. There's mechanically no way for Player 2 to ever have any infantry on these properties. So Player 1 can always get the recon to one of these two properties to block captures to it. But the same is not true in reverse, because now Player 2, if they want to do the same thing with their Day 3 recon, they get trapped. And not only do they get trapped, but because they don't have vision of the properties to begin with, actually these two captures are guaranteed for Player 1, but Player 2 gets both of these properties denied, at least for a while, because the recon can block one property and then go over and kill the infantry on the other property. So this is a pretty major discrepancy. And certainly, like, Player 2 should know that the Day 3 recon is much stronger for Day 1. But the fact that this imbalance between Player 2 and Player 1 exists has some pretty major consequences for the opener meta, where basically Player 2 can't safely ever open by putting infantry on these two squares. Instead, Player 2 has to send infantry this way to respect the possibility of a Day 3 recon by Player 1. And because Player 2 kind of has to do that, it actually gives Player 1 the ability to get the damage from the Day 3 recon without actually having to build the Day 3 recon. So he puts all of the risk onto Player 2 and all the potential reward on Player 1. Basically, player 2 has to guess right or get punished. And so it's kind of unfair the way that it ended up working. This is an example. It's a rare example of first turn advantage is kind of the technical term for it. And so I kind of brought this issue up to the map committee, and they took a look at it and changed the lander positioning so that now I don't know if I have a replay with the updated lander positioning, but basically because it's moved over one square, now it can go here in one turn, and then here, and then here. So essentially Player 2 can now reach this corner tile one turn earlier than it could before, and it actually balances the power of the Day 3 recon openers for both players, where both players can basically get guaranteed captures of these two properties. So that's something that you should just be aware of going forward, but you should also be aware that in the replay that we're about to cover, this is not an option for me, because I am Player 2 in this in the replay that we're going to be looking at. So just be advised that this map was changed, and actually it's changed in a way that it nerfed the day 3 recon opener for both players. All right, technically it nerfed it for player 1, but it was already kind of a bad opener for player 2, so it's still bad for player 2, or at least not as lucrative. So that's kind of the opener meta, and now that that's been changed, it's very strong to kind of go for these properties immediately, because you can kind of lock down the contested properties on that side very, very early on, and then you can just elect to play defense on those and then focus more on the center properties. When before, there was going to be a lot of fighting for these properties in the corner from the beginning, and you kind of have the proper dynamic of trying to contest the center, but also trying to contest the sides and things like that. So, all right, I think we've spent enough time on that. Finally, now that we are 40 minutes in, we can finally, I think, switch over to the actual game. I suppose one final thing before we get into this. So this is a Kindle versus Kindle matchup. Kindle is tier 3, available in tier 3 on this map, and if you're playing on this map in tier 3, you should be picking Kindle. You would be absolutely insane to pick anything other than Kindle in tier 3. And the reason for that is that there are 2 comm towers, and there are enough properties where if you just split the map down the middle, your superpower hits that threshold where your tanks one-shot tanks on planes and your infantry one-shot infantry on planes. That is such an incredibly powerful threshold to reach that it basically makes any other tier 3 CO completely unviable, and so that's something that you gotta look out for. And even in the Kindle mirror, you basically want to avoid using your CO power, because the CO for the superpower is so strong that if you're using your CO power, you're basically giving your opponent a huge window to be able to set up for a truly devastating superpower. And it's very difficult to position against an opponent who could just sit 6 moves away from your tanks and has the power to one-shot them at a moment's notice. So that's a very difficult situation to be in. Okay, so we're going to do the first couple of turns in this game with full vision for reasons that will become apparent very quickly. Nothing too exciting is going to be happening right away. Standard stuff, just going for the base. Interestingly enough, Law sends this infantry up in this direction, not electing to go for the property that is within 1 move of that city, or within that base. I will be electing to take the, I guess the more economic option. And even again, skipping all the cities here. So this is very, very crazy. And also day 3 recon for player 1. With the configuration of the map that we were playing on, it makes a lot of sense to go day 3 recon as player 1. So, on the other hand, I'm going to be going for a much more economic focused build. And you can see I actually could have taken this infantry and, well, I guess not this infantry, but if I really wanted to get crazy, I could have maybe sent something over this way. I mean, that's probably too crazy, but regardless, I'm using this lander to be very efficient and boost this infantry over so that it can get to this port 1 turn faster. And this just kind of works out pretty nicely. because I got these 2 infantry free. And so now this lander can send these 2 infantry over. However, do note that because I only moved the lander 1 square to the right, that does mean, well, so I get the value here, but that comes at a sacrifice because it's not, the lander's not here, which means that these first 2 infantry actually cannot go to this corner. I'm gonna have to go to the center instead. Now, I'm aware of the potential for a day 3 recon as well, and so I'm just gonna play around that by going for these caps earlier on rather than trying for the corner, because these are farther away from a day 3 recon, so they're going to be much safer. And then it also gives me that little economy bonus with that infantry as well to get the port a little faster. So you can already see that there are some very different ideas about the opening between myself and Law. And so this infantry skipped 2 properties. This infantry skipped 2 properties, going here and here, and now getting this as the first property. So this is already pretty crazy, and we're going to see that actually this infantry comes off of this city, and now Law is going to head for this corner. So this is a very unhinged opener by Law in terms of aggression. So this is basically placing super heavy priority on these 2 really contested properties and making sure that Law gets those before I even have the possibility of harassing them and locking them down later on. And additionally, this infantry skipping very aggressively, and so you can probably get an idea of what Law's plan is. But you have to realize this does come at a pretty serious economic price. This city is going to be ignored for a while, and you can see I've already got this city, and forget about, like, all these cities are basically untouched, but I'm going to be starting to get these cities pretty quickly, and I'm also going to be starting to get stuff on the main land block starting pretty shortly. So the nice thing about this lander position is unloading the infantry here gives me 1 turn access to this city, and I'm just doing this because this is very safe. This lander here blocks the route of the recon, so there's very little chance that this ends up getting harassed next turn, because generally any sort of day 3 recon is going to end up on these tiles. And so the vision, so let's say that it ends up on this tile, right? Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the vision range. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, of the recon. And so that recon is actually not going to see anything, which means that it's unlikely to end up doing any harass damage on these guys. And I'm going to go for a day 4 recon to try and start getting some pressure on this side. Now, I don't know what Law is doing, but my idea is that if Law is going for a more economic build that doesn't involve directly going for these 2 properties, the day 4 recon is going to be able to put substantial pressure on these caps if they happen later on. Additionally, it's just going to get me some very good early vision, and it's still economic because I've already got the 3 infantry up here, and so they're going to be able to start all these. So like this set of chains, and then the second layer of chains. So I'm going to be able to kind of get all of my cities with the 3 infantry that I've got already, and I can use the next couple of turns to start focusing on vehicles to potentially win a fight, or at least become more strong in this area in the early game. So this recon actually doesn't go all the way up to these cities, but does see the lander here. So I'm gonna know what is going on, but not really gonna have an opportunity to harass. But I don't know that any of this is going on yet. I'm just going on with my standard caps here. And pull the lander back. Okay. So I'm going for another recon here. So this is gonna let me get a lot of pressure. I do like, if you're gonna harass the recons, I do think that generally sending 2 recons is quite good, especially when you're playing against a Kindle, because you really want to take the infantry off the city. If you get counterattacked, at least you'll have killed the infantry on the city to trade 1 for 1 in terms of unit count. But things get really bad if you harass an infantry and it survives, and then a tank shows up and one-shots your recon, and then you just lose the recon for basically nothing. That's when things get really messy. You can already see here how the lack of a second transport vehicle is starting to cause my infantry to accumulate up there. So this is what I was talking about earlier in the map review, where in addition to adding on like a black boat or whatever transport unit, it can be valuable to think about a T-copter as well. So Law's going to finish these early caps here and lock down those 2 contested properties. And he's actually going to have a really aggressive recon positioning here. And this is, I think, really to know what I unload into this forest, because basically this is going to be my day 6 coming up. From Law's perspective, it's entirely possible that into this lander I could be loading 1 infantry for this mountain and then 1 tank for this forest, in which case Law needs to abandon the harass. But if it's anything other than that, then Law's going to have the green light to attack. But unless Law positions the recon here, he's not going to actually know what I unload, because I can unload it directly into the forest and it's not going to give any vision away. This actually does reveal a mistake of mine, though. So you'll see I loaded this guy directly into the lander. And that's actually, there's no point to doing that, because he's just going to sit there the next turn, because the lander's not going to be able to move. This infantry actually should go onto this mountain right here, because then next turn he can just go into the lander anyway, and it's still the same. But I would actually have vision. Oops, hold on, I skipped a little far ahead. So if I had this infantry here, I would have vision of this recon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I would know that this has to be a day 3 recon, and I would know so much information. And I'd know that it's probably not worth sending my lander to this spot, because it's an ambush. But instead, I loaded the infantry into the lander too early. So that's not really something I had thought about, because this is my first time playing on this map in this game. So it's not like I had a lot of knowledge of some of like the really niche details like that. And this is like a very minor detail, but it is just a pure mistake on my part. And so now I know for next time. So if you're ever worried about getting day 3 harassed, or having like early units show up to block you from unloading into this forest, you're going to have enough infantry in the early game. So just make sure you put something on that mountain. That's going to end up being very helpful for you. And it would have been helpful for me. But anyway, moving back to Law's vision here. So we see again this city getting abandoned to send 2 more infantry to the main area. So this is just a really, really uneconomic build from Law. And you can see, look at the income right now. I have 12K income and Law has 6K income. Now, obviously, Law's going to finish a lot of captures next turn, but it's only going to be 4. So, I mean, this is almost a tank's worth of income difference between us. And this is day 6. So this is a massive discrepancy between the two builds. But Law does have that comm tower early on, and you can see Law is positioning to also get this comm tower. It would have been pretty crazy if I had actually gone for like a tank opener and put a tank here. I could have probably shut all of this down, but it's not. I'm sending 2 infantry in, and I'm sending them into an ambush. And oh, I unload that guy onto the mountain. I'm like, that's not what I expected. And then I move this recon down. I've moved this guy down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that he is out of range of the mountain. Just so that Law can't know what kind of build I've done. So I see that these have been captured, and I see these 4 infantry, and then I see this recon. And so this is the exact reason why we've started the game with full vision. Starting from this point, I now know exactly what Law has done in all of the prior turns, because there's basically only one combination of moves that's possible that ends up in a state like this. Like, this has to be a day 3 recon. This has to be like you have to skip this city twice for both of these unloads. So I'm totally aware of the income situation. I can basically go into Move Planner and like exactly recreate everything that Law has done up to this point. And so I know that, well, it's not great that I've given up like these 2 really important caps, but I also know that there's a really substantial economic sacrifice that had to happen to make this possible. And I also do have the potential of some harass here, because I've got these 2 recons that are, you know, day 4, day 5. So I'm going to be able to potentially get in some damage over here, because I know that there can't be any vehicles. Like, there's not going to be any tanks coming anytime soon. There's just not enough income for it, because I know Law's been skipping a lot of cities. And so I go for a mech here, because I know that I need something cheap to be able to deal with this this recon, or at least to prevent the recon from harassing like this cap. Like, I'm gonna get slowed down here. Like, there's no way that I can, you know, get these caps for a while. So I need something cheap, and I really want a tank on this side, because my first plan is like, okay, well, if you went really aggressive over here, I'm actually set up pretty well to deal with this. I've got these 2 vehicles, and now I've got a tank. There's no way that, you know, Law can ferry over enough tanks to be able to match the power of this this vehicle force. And maybe I can, if I act quickly enough, maybe I can recap this tower and just basically end the game. Because the second that if Law loses this tower, the game is basically over, because he's going to have invested a substantial amount of the early income and sacrifice that to get a tower that would be lost at that point. So I want to look for that opportunity. I do need to keep in mind, though, that I want to get a black boat pretty soon, and so I think I'm setting up for that next turn, because I've got a decent amount of income coming next turn. But this allows me to both basically have some defense against the recon, but also put max pressure on this side. So I think I actually made a small mistake last turn. I ended up leaving 1 infantry inside this lander. And so my initial plan was, okay, he's going to hit the infantry on the mountain, and then I'll just retreat that infantry back into the lander and then pop out the fresh one on top of the mountain and take the other one back here to heal. Because I didn't have any vision of this infantry coming. But I think what I should have just done is I should have landed, I should have unloaded them both. If I unload them both, then Law has to move the recon here to hit the infantry and then also block it from potentially delaying this cap. And if that's the case, then this infantry would be at full HP and able to come over to this city here. And then this recon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, would actually not have vision of the city to be able to interrupt it. So I think I just caused myself to delay getting this city for a while because I was trying to be too cute. But this was kind of an odd situation to be in. So, well, in the future, I'll know what's going on. But Law, aware of the possibility of harass, gonna retreat from this area, and you can see that Law's got a artillery and a mech queued up here, and so this is going to be kind of a cute little build to counter the harass that potentially could be coming, because Law sees no vehicles over here getting unloaded, so the logical assumption would be there's probably vehicles over here. So actually, I think now is a good time to switch to my vision. For the rest of the game, because from now on, we're not going to have the luxury of kind of being able to drive everything that Law has done. All we know is that Law's made a really big income sacrifice, but Law is going to be up in terms of comm towers, and so when the fighting comes later on, that's going to be a challenge for me, and I need to basically take advantage of this income efficiency in the cap phase that I've gotten to turn that into some sort of board advantage strong enough to counteract the fact that I'm going to be down in comm towers. So the nice thing is I do know that this infantry is totally unprotected because I saw the lander leave. So I can just go in and get a free shot on this infantry. So I might as well take that. I'm not sure why I didn't go for this infantry. I guess I thought maybe I didn't have the possibility of killing it. Yeah, there's some reason why I didn't go for it. I think maybe I would have damaged it once, but then I didn't think I could get any further damage in the next turn. And then it wouldn't even stop the cap. So I'd rather just kind of get the free hit on the infantry. And then this sets up the possibility for me to kind of block. Oh yeah, it's because I wanted to block, right? So if I go here, I'm setting up to basically come in with this infantry to take the comm tower. And so I want to weaken this stuff as much as possible. I don't actually care if he takes the city. I think that was the rationale. And we send in the second recon. And we send in the tank as well. And one of the nice things about the tank is because its reinforcement distance is so short, the tank can actually get to this square. So the tank can be part of my wall if the tank wants to be. And we're going to set this infantry in position to hit this comm tower. It is a little bit unfortunate though, because we'd have to skip over the city. So we're going to lose some efficiency by trying to go for this, but we are pretty well set up for it. And because we know that there's a recon here, the build is very inefficient, and we're going to be harassing here, we also kind of want to go for the center at the same time, because Law can't be strong everywhere at the same time. So we're just going to take whatever the map gives us. And right now the map is giving us the center. And because we sent early infantry this way, this is the natural follow-up. So at least we'll try to lock down the other contested properties, even though we're getting locked out of the comm towers. So we kind of swap out the infantry. I don't know how much this really accomplishes, but it was an idea. It's cute, I guess. The one thing that this does do is it does force the recon to stay here and hit the infantry rather than shift towards the center and deny my captures of the middle. Because if Law does not stay and attack this infantry, then I will start to cap some cities. So it's kind of forcing him to do the economic damage here, even though at least this city certainly is very safe for me in the long run. And then I can kind of unload this guy and let him heal up the cities back there. And now I've got the black boat, and so now we've got our second transport unit online. So we're going to be starting to flood infantry into this side, and this is where things are going to start to shift a little bit in terms of the strength of the fronts, where this front is going to start to become stronger for me relative to what it was earlier on the game, and it's going to be harder for me to push in this way as well. We'll see how that turns out. Law now with 2 comm towers. I don't have any. We see a mech pop out here. And something else is going to pop out into the forest. Now, I have pretty good information about kind of what is possible with the income curve of Law in this game. So it basically can be either a tank or artillery. And I kind of spoiled it with the vision earlier. But I'm kind of expecting it to be an artillery because that's kind of the logical thing that you would do, right? Like you pull everything back from the tower, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to sit on these 2 squares with a mech and artillery, and there's kind of no easy way to break that. You really need to have a pretty powerful advantage, and you need to have it for a long time, and if you can't exploit it quickly enough, it's very easy for this lander just to reinforce a bunch of tanks over to here, and then you can't really bust it anymore. So, yeah, it's a pretty reasonable follow-up here. Oh, I see. The infantry moves out first, right? Because the infantry was in there first. So now something pops out of there into the forest, and we're assuming it's an artillery. And I mean, it's the power of this kind of corner forest, right? Like, you're never going to get a unit here. So the only way that you can attack something in the forest is by controlling both of these tiles, and he's got the infantry kind of blocking one of those, and there's a mech behind it and another infantry there. So it's very difficult for me to ever break that and not take a lot of damage in the meantime. And then this recon actually comes here to block access to this landing point. To me, this is kind of crazy a little bit. I'm not necessarily sure that I was going to be landing stuff here anyway, because it's actually like, it's going to take me a while to be able to contest this because I have all my vehicles on the other side. So I'm actually more focused on just like trying to lock down this area to get the properties. And this is like kind of a longer term objective for me. So having this recon blocking the way isn't really harming me that much compared to what it could do maybe if it went center. That being said, it is kind of nice for Law because Law can see deploys out of this base. So he will know if I make any tanks out of that base. Although it's not likely to yield any information because I can just as easily build the tanks from this base if that's what I'm going to do, and then he won't have any way of knowing. But at least it does provide some information. So now, I mean, it's not great that I've given up both of these comm towers, but I basically have to at least try to get this one back. Because if for some reason this ends up being a tank, then I am going to flip this tower, and from that point, having this tower in the center again is probably game over in the long term, just based on the sacrifices in economy that were necessary to take them in the first place. If it's an artillery, then we're just going to have to play the long game. But the way we can set this up, so first of all, I know that if all the vehicles are here, then there's definitely no vehicles here. And I actually have not revealed this recon yet because it was out of the mountain range. So I can still make a play for this tower and also use this recon for harassment. And it's kind of risk-free harassment, really, to further hinder the economy, because this guy's going to come over here to take this city, and I can actually block that. And actually, if he positions poorly enough and for some reason gets cocky and leaves the infantry next to the city, I can actually go on the city and get a free city hit. Now, that's unlikely to happen, but regardless, this recon should definitely be able to deny this city for a couple of turns and get some free value there. And on the other side, we're going to be walling this with our recon and our tank, and then we cap the comm tower. Okay, so we can just play out the turn here because it's pretty straightforward. It's just a bunch of capping. And so this is basically kind of a high reward, low risk play. If this is a tank, then obviously it's not going to be able to break through this wall and disrupt the capture. If it's an artillery, it actually doesn't matter that our recon is in artillery range, because the artillery has to shoot the infantry, and obviously it's not going to kill the infantry in one hit. And so if it ends up being an artillery, then we will just play for a longer game instead, and we'll have to abandon the attempt to take this comm tower. But it's kind of like, if it's not an artillery, then we're just going to win. If it is an artillery, we take some damage on an infantry, and we chill out. So it's not too bad. And I think I spoiled it with vision earlier, but it is going to end up being an artillery. So we'll have to adjust our plan next turn. But for now, just focused on being able to lock down our cities. And so we're gonna we need to keep an eye on this city. So we know that last turn, I think the tower was finished. So that means that the infantry is probably like here or here. And next turn, this city is likely to have an attempted capture. We can't let him get this city. Even if we need to throw an infantry into an infantry capping a city, then that's fine. We're going to have more infantry coming this way eventually anyway, because now we have, two transports. So it's actually okay to trade a little bit inefficiently to make sure that this city stays neutral. Because we're kind of banking on going into the mid game with an income lead. Like we're going to be down a comm tower, so we need to have something going for us. And the easiest thing to have is we're probably going to get both of these cities uncontested, just based on what we know about the vehicles, and none of them being in the center. So if we get the two center cities and then we also get this city, then we're going to be up 2K, and there's going to be opportunities for us to play a later game without kind of equalizing things out, but being down a comm tower. In this turn, I'm going to be going for a T-copter. Again, even if we don't control this tile, we need to really maximize our infantry going to the center, because this is like, if this ends up being an artillery over here, then we're never going to be able to get this comm tower back. It's just not realistic. So if we're not going to get the comm tower back, then we need to start thinking about other options on the other side of the map. And so the alternative option is, if we're going to push this comm tower, we need to have a lot of infantry so that we can start trading infantry. And if we trade infantry like kind of 1-for-1, then with the black boat and with the T-copter, and only one base able to produce units each turn on this front, the law is going to run out of infantry first. And then once Law runs out of infantry, then we'll be able to take this tower kind of unopposed, in theory. So we do build a tank from here because there's not really much point in building the tank over here. We have to wait for the lander to get back anyway. And so any vehicles that we're going to build, we can just build them next turn to be landed. Okay, so lander moves back. A lot of stuff is happening off screen. This guy goes over, so wisely not going next to the city. Actually, could have been... I mean, there's no way for Law to have known this, but if this infantry actually went to here, I wouldn't have had vision of it, so I wouldn't have been able to hit it. I would have just parked the recon on the city instead. Or maybe even, it's possible I could have pulled this infantry off to get vision. It might have been worth it, I don't know. But, anyway, moot point. And then I do get this infantry popped, so unfortunate. And we do see a black boat as well, so we do, and only one infantry unloaded. That's kind of surprising, actually, that there's only one infantry to unload. But, so yeah, so there's a lot of infantry here. And, well, we don't have a lot of infantry. That being said, there's not really any realistic objectives that Law can take on this front that Law doesn't already have. So now looking at my next turn, I can't basically accomplish anything more on this side of the map. Like I need to, lock down this property, and we'll get there once the infantry's kind of finish their other caps. But there's no way I can push into this, into the artillery, into the mech. But a mech and an artillery are very, very immobile. And so what I want to do is I want to now set up a front shift, which is going to take a very long time, but it is the best option for me. And ultimately the idea is these guys, well, the mech is too slow, and the artillery has to stay here in case infantry show up. Basically, in case I do exactly what I did this turn, right? Where I block access to the comm tower and throw an infantry on there. So those two units are pinned here forever. So if I take everything else and I shift it to the other side of the map, it's going to take me a while, but eventually I'm going to get there. I will have the superior infantry reinforcement for my transports, and I should also have more vehicles because my cap phase was more efficient, so I should have more money to build stuff, and the mech and the artillery they're not going to be able to shift over as well. So in like 3 or 4 turns, in theory, if I pull everything over here, I should be able to have more stuff and to have a superior fighting force, even if I have less comm towers than Law does. So this is the turn where I start to commit to that plan. It's day 9 when I'm starting to think about what I'm going to do later on for the next kind of 5 turns. Now, obviously, I take this free harass here because I know that there can't be anything to disrupt that. And this is also nice because we get vision of this area. So whatever gets unloaded next turn, we're going to know exactly what shows up. And so we start shifting over. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I could have shifted this guy. Could I have shifted him further? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I guess I could have shifted him further. I guess I'm waiting to see what shows up. This tank moves as far as possible. But okay, I see what I'm doing now. So I remember. So I still hadn't completely given up on this tower, because I was like, okay, I'm probably going to shift everything over, but if I just keep all my vehicles out of vision, it's possible that I might be able to trick Law into thinking that I'm actually just backing off to set up for another attack here. And I want the option, like if he decides to extend too far, because I still need to make sure that I don't lose this city. Because this city, like, even though it's a safe city for me, if you can actually see the entire board, you realize that it could be vulnerable, especially if I'm shifting everything away. So anyway, but you can see the idea here pretty clearly. Everything is going to start working over this way, and I'm going to see if I can delay this city along the way as long as possible, but it kind of depends on what shows up next turn. And so, yeah, so if Law decides to extend out of the turtle shell, then I'm ready to hop on it, like Mario. I'm very self-impressed. I'm sorry, that was a great joke. I don't care if you didn't think it was funny. That's a great joke. So yeah, we're in position to either loop back on this side, but otherwise we're just gonna rush to the other side of the map. And then we go tank, artillery, infantry. That just lines up with our income curve better, and having an artillery over here is pretty nice. Being able to like drop an infantry or drop an artillery on this square starts to control a pretty substantial amount of area in the contested space there. So the recon comes back to block the drop-off point, but that is not a problem for us because we were probably never going to go there anyway. Our lander is not even in position to go over here, and the black boat can, but the black boat has an extra movement, so it can go here or here, and it doesn't need to choose. And we see an infantry pop out of the forest here, so this is good to know. This is like the value of having that infantry on the mountain that I should have had there earlier. So now we can be pretty confident this infantry was the infantry that capped the comm tower, and now it's going to cap this city. So we need to make sure that we interrupt it this turn. Black boat heads down to the port, and we see an unload of 2 tanks. So this is great. This is great information. We know, seeing these 2 tanks, we can be very confident that there's basically nothing in terms of vehicles on this entire side. This is basically Law reinforcing everything up here, and so that's fine. So now seeing this, we'd love to try and convince Law for as long as possible that our vehicles are just kind of waiting up here to launch an attack on the comm tower, but actually we're just going to be leaving now. Might be a hard sell, but we're at least going to try. Okay, so day 10 is here, and obviously there's no way that we're going to be diving in on any of this. That would be absolutely insane. And unfortunately, Law does see this tank here with this tank, so I don't know. Maybe I could have committed more, but I think even if Law doesn't see the tank, it's probably not too hard to figure out what I'm actually pulling off. Whoa, hold on. So I have to move this guy over to be able to get vision of this city so that I can interrupt it. And I come face to face with a second recon here. So that was kind of unpleasant. And then I move this guy over, and so he is out of range of the tank. So he's perfectly safe here. I was kind of hoping that this port wouldn't be captured, but actually an infantry came from this base and came up to get this port. So that was a little bit surprising, because I was hoping maybe I can deny this, knowing where all the vehicles are. But that's not going to happen, so unfortunate. But this, I mean, recons are pretty fast, so this guy is in position to potentially help if a fight breaks out here. So we go in and we deny the city here. I think I maybe could have done it from this square, but I just wasn't willing to risk it. in case somehow it got trapped, which, I mean, unlikely, but just it's so bad if I give this up. The HP of the infantry there doesn't even matter. And now we've got the artillery backing this up. And so this mech is really helping us because we can't really block for the artillery, but the fact that the mech is there means that if these recons, well, this recon can't reach, actually. So being in this corner is kind of bad. Like, this recon can't hit anything other than the city. But anyway, it's a nice position for him. And mechs and artillery are great friends, especially if you're on a lower funds map. So we have to kind of send the black boat over this way. I'd say I much would have preferred to send him here. It would have given me much more synergy with the pressure that ultimately I want to put on the comm tower, but I need these vehicles here. It's actually much more important because, again, denying this city is actually more important than anything else that I'm doing right now. The comm tower is a longer term objective for me, so we'll gotta rank our priorities and play accordingly. And next thing next turn is we will get another infantry with this T-copter that will kind of drop in the middle of fighting. So really anything that we can do to start incentivizing infantry trades is in the long run going to be pretty good for us because it's much easier for us to get new infantry over here than it is for Law. I actually shift this this recon back, and this is a pure deception play. I'm deliberately putting this recon in vision of the mountain in hopes that Law will put an infantry back onto the mountain to see the recon, and then maybe plant a seed of doubt in Law's mind about where all this stuff is going, because this stuff is for sure it's all going to the other side, and this recon can kind of catch up later, but it's a little bit of like mind games to see if I can maybe like force these tanks to wait one extra turn, not knowing where to go, because one turn with a full army over here could be enough to win a decisive fight. So I don't need to like kill the tanks. Delaying the tanks could just be enough. So, and if it doesn't work, then that's okay. I can just send the recon over to the other side in another turn. So it's kind of nothing ventured, nothing gained kind of play. There's basically no risk of trying it. But we are shifting everything over, and we're going to start to get some copters now. We're at 19K of income. So we want to start getting as much stuff over here as possible, and being only able to reinforce with 2 vehicles every other turn means that copters are a really good way to supplement this force with more of my income. I'm also going to build an artillery. Artilleries are just good, but I'm already starting to think about, like, in 2 or 3 turns, if I end up shifting all this stuff over here, then Law's next move might be to try and attack this city. And so I want to send the artillery kind of over this way as a backup plan, just in case there's like a lot of infantry that show up here and put pressure on here. Because I'm not going to really have a lot of vehicles to counter push and defend the city. But having the artillery there should be completely sufficient to make sure that it stays in my hands. So he moves his infantry directly next to my recon. Surprise. And we do see the tanks kind of show up. So unfortunately, this recon didn't do his job. But we are seeing everything. Like we get a very strong idea of what Law's thinking. And this is actually really important. So we see that the mech goes back. So this is great. So this artillery and this mech, they are never leaving. So that is 9,000 funds. It's basically a little more than a tank that are just never going to participate in any fight. Kind of interesting. Law elects to kind of put these two infantry together to clear off my infantry. But that actually puts an infantry on the shoals in range of the artillery. So it seems bad, but it's actually a 1-for-1. It's kind of good for me. And it also exposes the low HP infantry. So this recon has seen what it needs to see. Obviously, we're not going to be attacking here anymore, so we don't need to pretend like we're going to be attacking there. Law knows and I know that the fight is going to happen on the other side of the map. But fortunately, we started shifting early enough that we can now have our vehicles kind of arrive. And so we send an infantry in here. That, I don't know if that was a guaranteed, but it was like a 98 to 107. So there's like an 80% chance that would one-shot that infantry there. So we get that roll. And then, amusingly enough, this recon is vulnerable. So I get a roll there. I think that was pretty favored for me. But this is the benefit of kind of the surprise front shift, right? Like, we get value out of these units immediately. And now we see the tank. So this tank was built from this base last turn. So Law is starting to shift the funds over to this side of the map and probably won't be building any more vehicles. So we can expect copters in the future. Another thing that we could expect, actually, that I was really heavily anticipating is medium tanks. I was really expecting medium tanks from this base. And the reason for that is medium tanks with 3 towers, I believe one-shot tanks on planes. I think it's definitely a one-shot on shoals. Actually, let me just look that up because it's important. Okay, I've looked it up. It's not a guaranteed kill, but it's like a 90 or 80 to 90% chance for medium tanks to one-shot tanks on planes with 3 towers. So, in my opinion, if you know you're going to get attacked on your weak side and you're going to have 3 towers, and especially the reinforced distance to the fight is really, really low, a medium tank is like an amazing choice to exploit the comm tower advantage from the early game. So already in my mind, I'm thinking about what can I do in case we start to see medium tanks show up in another turn or two. Now, the good news is this turn, or at least the coming turn, I don't really care about this tank. The best thing that this tank could do is just trade into this recon and kill it. And if that happens, then that's fine, because that just means we traded a recon for a recon, and it's kind of all square. But if this tank goes onto this tank, the copter won't help me this turn, but the mech, again, going to be providing a lot of value. As we continue to shift things over. And we're not especially worried about this mech being exposed as well. For one, Law has no vision of any of this because they just killed his recon. Secondly, anything that attacks this mech is going to be in artillery range, so that's good for me. Third, anything that attacks this mech is going to be in infantry, leading to infantry trades, which is, as we've already established, infantry trading is very, very good for me because Law is going to run out of infantry first because of the number of transports that we've got. So even if this mech takes a hit, we're going to be happy with it. And this tank is already totally safe because of this tank being there, and whatever HP is left on the mech will make things fine for me. So we do see the tanks continue to shift over. and we see the infantry rushing over. So this is, you know, pretty sound play from Law. Obviously, everything is coming directly over this way, including all the infantry. But these infantry, you know, they have a long way to walk. And actually, I haven't seen anything show up on my city yet. And I'm kind of anticipating that next turn... Well, let's finish this turn first. So this is kind of an interesting play. I'm going to trade another infantry, but puts them both in artillery range. But I just don't think this is advantageous for Law, because this is just going to create more artillery trades. Or sorry, more infantry trading. And infantry trading is bad for Law. It's actually not good for Law. I think the idea is that Law is hoping that he can deny this property, or at least prevent me from getting this property long enough by trading infantry. But we'll see if that actually happens. So I am also anticipating that this city could be captured pretty soon. So I'm going to set up a defense for this. I don't need to like put anything on the city, but I just need to put infantry in range to be able to attack something that goes on the city. And then I only need to delay a capture one turn, and then this artillery will be in position to defend it any further. And we do see that, you know, we need to set up. So this recon is bait. It's in the unlikely event that there's like a tank down here, and Law sees this recon, might be tempted to one-shot it, because with the tower advantage, any tank hit on this recon will one-shot it, but then obviously it would be in artillery range. So Law trying to delay this this capture, but it turns out that I have a way to get it anyway. So this is pretty nice. So now, who's trapping who, right? Like you're blocking me, but I'm blocking you. So this 1 HP infantry can't actually get enough damage on this infantry to delay it a turn. So now this is kind of nice, because I'm pretty confident that there's no way for Law to prevent this capture from going through. And getting this capture is going to put me at 22k, and so that's going to be a 2k income lead. And on a 20k map, or sorry, a 21k map, having kind of a 10% income lead is actually pretty substantial in the long run. If it stays like this for the rest of the game, then it's actually enough of an advantage that I can actually continue playing, even being down a comm tower. Some more reinforcements. We put an infantry into this lander, but we don't actually have room to unload the infantry, which is kind of annoying. But next turn, we can unload the infantry and still move back, because unloading an infantry doesn't actually use the lander's movement. And so it's actually kind of okay that the infantry just kind of gets delayed from doing stuff, as long as we're just getting the units over there. And again, in the long run, we're going to have more infantry. And really, this comm tower is going to belong to us the second that we gain control over this shoal, right? Because we've traded a lot of infantry up here. We're definitely going to have more. And then as soon as we get here, we just start landing infantry on these two squares, and we can send infantry to cap this comm tower, do join caps, do whatever, until we lock it down. And there's not really going to be much Law can do to stop that. So we're setting up copters here. We're just trying to really keep them out of vision more than anything. Because we are setting up for what is likely to be a pretty major fight next turn. So these guys are all prepared to defend this city. So if Law ends up, we kind of don't know where Law's reinforcements have been, but if for some reason a bunch of tanks got landed over here and went to support an attack on this city, we can probably deal with it with the 2 copters shifting this way. If it's just infantry, then we have plenty of infantry to deal with that. So I think no matter what happens, we can always make sure that we don't lose this city. And I think that's the primary reason for why these copters are here. They are here to defend the city and also be able to help in the fight. And I can kind of do both by being in this position. And then we have an anti-air as well. And we are saving 4,200 funds because next turn we want to get a bomber. We want to get a bomber because we talked about how good medium tanks would be. Having a bomber is going to be the easiest way for us to deal with medium tanks. And I think it's pretty likely that it's going to be very difficult for Law to build anti-air out of this base once the fight has started, because you're gonna need this base for other things, like probably tech units or like copters and things like that. So I think the bomber, the movement makes it really strong, but also the surprise factor, it can really just snowball the whole side. And then once it's online, I don't need to care if like a neo tank shows up, if a medium tank shows up. We're gonna be able to deal with that, and we're probably gonna be able to deal with it and also protect the bomber because we're gonna have a lot of infantry to wall in front of it. All right. Before we do this, I should also mention I am totally aware, given that I've seen the 2 tanks here, that this tank can come and kill this recon, and then this tank can come and hit the artillery. I am 100% aware that that is a possibility, and that is why all this stuff is all here to support that. And if that happens, I should have a really, really efficient counterattack. And if that happens as well, like I'm already trading away this recon for this recon, so it's not like I'm ending up like really far behind in the vehicle trades. So it's gonna end up being like 4K and a tank hit on the artillery for 2 tanks. And in terms of fighting power, that is favorable for me if that happens, which it does. It happens immediately. Good news though is seeing that makes it pretty likely that we're going to be able to hang on to this capture here. Law does me a favor and chips away at my T-copter, which gives me charge and accomplishes nothing. And now it is my turn. So this is my turn to basically reveal everything that I've been planning up to this point, because the front shift is now complete, right? Like we've got all of our power over here. We actually didn't get attacked on this city like I was expecting. So that means that basically all of the infantry are just gonna be marching straight for this front, which is fine. That's actually also good, because that just means I can continue to shift these guys over and I don't need to worry about protecting the city. So that simplifies that, and basically Law is wagering the entire game on holding on to this comm tower and then winning a long game, basically, through the power of just having really high attack. But my plan is to win the game by having more stuff based on my income lead and based on having a very economic opener. I should have more vehicles, and especially now we're going to be taking out these 2 tanks, and we're going to be taking out a lot of stuff. This turn is a little bit tricky though, because And this tank is here, and I'm very concerned that there could be an artillery on this city, and I don't really have any way of knowing if there's an artillery on this city without just attacking the tank. And so there's a little bit of a dilemma for me in how I use my my copters, and without going too much into the nuts and bolts of like how I'm setting up this move, I basically have to make a choice. Either I have to use my artillery or use my copters and position them a little bit more forward. And if I do that, then I can basically use a copter to hit this tank and see whether there's an artillery on the city or not. And that's kind of it's low risk in terms of tanks, but it is higher risk in terms of exposing my copters. The other option is I just YOLO it and use tanks, and then that'll let me keep my copters a little bit farther back. But I elect to play for the safe option, because if there is an artillery here, it basically will one-shot any tank with the Kindle bonus damage. And so for me, that seems like kind of a big risk, and I'd rather have the copters a little bit more forward. And using the copters first does allow me to trade into the tanks just a little bit more efficiently. So we do that at the beginning, just to see what we're up against, so that we know what we can plan for the rest of it. And so we see no artillery here, so that's good. So that's going to let us plan the rest of our turn. Getting that mech value. Kills a 1 HP infantry. Hey, you know what? If it works, it works. And now this frees up space. We can use these recently landed infantry. I actually see a copter here. I was not happy to see a copter here. This is actually quite concerning. This is concerning because this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this means that this was 3 turns ago. And if it's 3 turns ago, then that means there may also be a copter that is 2 turns ago, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which would be here. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if there's a 2 turns ago copter in addition to this 3 turns ago copter, that means that there are 2 copters that can hit my copter. And it's a little awkward for me because I'm sending the lander back this turn, and I've got the anti-air made, so that's good. But there's going to be like a 1-turn window where if Law commits everything to killing my air, I'm not actually going to have anything that shoots up. So that's a little awkward for me, but we had to take a risk either way. And so it seems like we kind of played around the possibility of artillery, and that's not the world we're living in. But we are living in the copter world, so it is what it is. But the good news is I can kind of wall with these infantry to some extent, and this positioning is set up so that this tank is blocking this infantry from coming down and hitting my mech. And I have to leave this infantry here, which sees everything, but I already kind of attacked with everything this turn anyway, so the extra vision doesn't really change anything, because Law knows what I've got now. Another thing that's very important to keep in mind is the charge. Charge is at 38k, and for me it's 33k. I'm likely to receive a big attack this turn, and that's both good and bad. The bad news is if I lose my air units, then it's going to be really awkward. The good news is if I lose my air units, I am absolutely going to have enough charge for a counter super attack. Super power next turn. So Kindle superpower is insane. We talked about that in the map breakdown. But even with 1 tower, my infantry have at least a slight roll to one-hit kill. They're going to one-hit kill any infantry on shoals, and tanks are going to one-hit kill enemy tanks on shoals. So the superpower is still very, very good, even though I'm down a tower. So getting the first superpower is incredibly important. And if Law is going to attack into me here, it is very, very likely that I'm going to get that first superpower, because Law is definitely not getting the superpower this turn. Using my black boat, I can refuel the lander. It's pretty cool. And there's the bomber. So we had planned for that for a couple of turns, and finally last turn we had the funds to do it. So let's see what we get here. As long as we don't lose both of these copters, it's going to be really good for us. If we lose both the copters, then we'll see. We'll see how it goes. An anti-air show up and pop my mech. And copter comes in. So this is the second turn copter that we were, or so the 2 turns before copter that shows up. So we thought that was pretty likely to exist, and it did exist. But this copter comes in and hits the tank. And this tank dies. And tank hits tank. And this infantry goes in, which is interesting. So, as I mentioned, as long as this copter doesn't die, we're going to have a good time. Now, Law absolutely could have committed harder to get this copter and just chose not to. I'm a little bit surprised that happened, but regardless, we'll take it. This is Kindle Superpower turn. Immediately. I even popped it before I planned out the turn, because I was like, this is happening. Kindle Superpower, really, really good. Enjoy. Kaboom. 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 Bonk. Kaboom. Kaboom. Bonk. That's a lot of dead stuff. How much dead stuff is that? 18 to 7. A lot of dead stuff. And that mech, our mech. So if you think about like what is the difference between the mech value? This mech sat on this mountain for the entire game. My mech it finished clearing off an infantry, and it tanked an anti-air hit, which then lets the anti-air get one shot just in time for my bomber to show up. So my mech got incredible value, even in death. Did a great job, mech. And now I've fully cleared off this area, and with the T-copter now, there's nothing stopping me from getting this comm tower. Another fun thing is that because I get the first superpower, even though Law has access to 3 comm towers, the fact that I got the superpower first actually denies the one-hit kill on all the tanks. It actually ends up being a 2-hit. So getting the first superpower, incredibly important. It changes the roles so much by having the first one. And then all the other infantry basically are just there to spread out. I'm just trying to, obviously I'm going to get superpowered in counterattacks. I'm just trying to make sure that as few of my guys get one shot as I can. But feeling pretty good. This is my power spike turn. Having this anti-air here means I'm now safe from the copters. And obviously the bomber means I'm safe from the tech. So now there's nothing to be scared of anymore. And this is just an instant resign. So superpower, pretty good. Let's take a look at this with full vision. there's actually some interesting things going on that I didn't know about as the game was being played. So we kind of saw the first couple of turns with full vision, so I'm going to skip over those for the most part. But I think the first thing I want to point out is, so we're on day 7 and day 8, and I want to look at the army value. So normally the funds are going to ping pong back and forth, or sorry, the army value is going to ping pong back and forth in the early game, because that's just how the income curve works. Like player 1 starts out building units, and then player 2 starts out with that extra infantry, and then the income goes back and forth from there. And so Law should usually have, like, if things were even, Law should have like half of his turn's income more army value than I do. So Law should be at about 80,000 in army value right now. But Law is actually only at 70,000. And so sometimes when you can't see the army value, and so it's difficult to quantify like how much economic sacrifice was necessary in order to capture properties this aggressively, by like skipping this city and sending this infantry, almost straight up here. So it's kind of hard to quantify that, right? But we can see that already by day 8, more than a half turn's income ahead of where I should be, or rather, it's more accurate to say that Law is more than a half turn's income behind where he should be. And so I think my strategic thinking was very sound, because I knew that as long, like, even if I have less comm towers, I can compensate for that by just having more stuff numerically, and especially being able to pin these 2 units over here. It's even more pronounced. And so I felt that even though, like, strategically it was a little awkward for me being down those comm towers, and it's never comfortable to be, fighting 1 against 3 comm towers, I felt like I was pretty advantaged and in control for the majority of the game, even though the pressure was kind of on me to play it correctly. All right, another thing that is worth pointing out. So this turn, Law screws up. This is kind of a silly error. This infantry is supposed to be the one that goes over the comm tower, but I don't know if Law wasn't like paying attention or whatever, but ends up sending that infantry back, and then realizes, oh, I actually need that infantry to get the comm tower. So by the time the game ends, this infantry has actually not reached the comm tower. So I was just assuming that it was 1 against 3 comm towers, but that's actually not what was happening. It was actually 1 against 2. That being said, if we look at all the time that was wasted, so day 10, the infantry should be here, and then day 11 here, day 12 here, day 13 starts the cap, and then day 14 finishes the cap. So the extra comm tower would literally have only been relevant for this turn here. Maybe something could have changed, like maybe this copter dies in 1 hit because it had some chip damage on it, but it would have taken a pretty lucky roll for that to happen anyway. So that was a little bit of a sloppy mistake by Law, but I actually don't think it impacted anything at all. Another thing that I noticed going through the replay. So this is, I think, the first turn of the black boat. Yeah. So it's just a little awkward because Law used the infantry so aggressively with the lander in the early game. When the time comes for the black boat to come online, there's actually only 1 infantry in range to get ferried over, so that's kind of awkward. Let's see, was there anything else that I missed? But yeah, it's like look at all this stuff that's pinned in this corner. Like these guys are just doing nothing the whole game. Look at all this infantry. Totally useless. Totally useless. And so we did eventually get a Neo-Tank transition here. It's way too late, but as you can see from the last turn, like the bomber's already there, so like the Neo-Tank is absolutely dead the second it reveals itself. And I mean, there's nothing here to deal with the anti-air that I've got. So this game was totally over. But anyway, Kindle Superpower, very, very good. But this was kind of a very interesting game, because if the game ends up like equalizing and Law is able to kind of stabilize, then it does end up being pretty challenging for me because I have to deal with those comm towers. But I think I made some really good decisions with the front shift and set in motion the events that eventually, I mean, the payoff didn't really happen for like 6 or 7 days. But once it finally did happen, you know, it was like a total decisive victory. And so I think I was challenged to play very well strategically in this game, and plan much farther ahead than I normally do, in having like a good big picture strategy and executing it well and being confident that that it will pay off if I just continue to stick to it. All right, that I think brings us to the end of this one. I hope you enjoyed this replay. This was a fun game. I know a lot of people are really interested in this game and this map, and seeing us square off. Law's a really good opponent. I think this opener would work against a lot of players, and I think the map kind of needed to be changed so that the meta doesn't get kind of stained by, you know, does player 1 day 3 recon, does player 1 not day 3 recon. So I'm glad that interaction is gone, or at least it's balanced between the players. So we'll see how this map kind of plays out in the future now that change has been made. But yeah, it was a cool game, and I really respect how Law just kind of went for it. Law is kind of known as a tank spammer, and I really respect that he went for something totally unhinged, playing off of his image as someone who plays maybe more passively, and instead just going for something totally aggro, hoping to catch me off guard. It just didn't work this time because I played around the potential for aggro. So I respect that he's thinking at that level. I think there's very few players that are able to kind of get into the more mind game, like poker aspects of Fog, and so I respect that a lot. Okay, that's enough for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. We've got a lot of tournament games going on right now. There's like the quarterfinal games in both Smacky Cup 3 and Smacky Cup 4 happening for me right now. So I'm going to be focused on those. I think those are going to be both very challenging matches. I really don't love the Smacky Cup 3 finals maps that much. At least the first round. I don't love that it's like a live map. That's not my favorite. But it is what it is. I'll do my best. And hopefully we'll have some more good reviews for the channel in the future. But until then, I've been Elagatua. Next time I'll hopefully still be Elagatua, and hopefully you'll still be here watching these videos. So see you next time.